Okay, that was unfortunate. All right, we're back. Let's try this again. Welcome, everybody.
Good evening.
Every week now we have a little bit of a snafu going on here. When we start this thing up, something happens. Welcome. Glad everybody could make it. Sabbath is it started, or in 3 hours it'll start out there and out west. Tonight's topic is the sixth commandment: "Thou shalt do no murder." And we think it's quite fitting for all the things that are in the news currently. And it is strange how sometimes our program topics tie in real well with what the previous week's news is. So we're going to start out. If Dr. if you take us out.
Yes. I'm going to start off with two little simple stories. One is a guy's in his basement. He digs around an old corner, and sure enough, he finds a magic lamp. And he rubs it. Out pops a genie. Poof! The genie says, "Master, you have 3 wishes." So, of course, he says, "I want $10 million in a Swiss bank." There's your wish. Poof! A document floats down, and it says, he's got $10 million in a Swiss bank. He says, "My second wish, I want a Lamborghini sports car." It's like the lady in the video. Looks in his driveway, poof, and there's a dark blue Lamborghini sports car. He says, "Now I need to be real careful about this third wish. I got to think about this a lot." And the genie says, "Come on, come on, come on. I got other people to deal with." "Okay, I think I've got the perfect wish." He says, "I want to be desirable and irresistible to women." And poof, he turned into a credit card.
Credit card. That's a new twist on that joke.
Yes, you didn't expect that one, did you?
No, it's a new twist. I hadn't heard that one yet.
Credit card. I said, no, that wouldn't appeal to everybody. The second story is a real short one. A funeral procession pulled into a cemetery. Several carloads of family members, followed by a big black truck, towing a boat. And in the boat was a coffin. And so the young man asked, "Well, why is there a boat in the coffin, or a coffin in the boat?" And a passerby who knew people says, "Wow, that guy must have been a really avid fisherman to bring for his casket to be in a boat." "Oh, he still is an avid fisherman," said one of the mourners. "As a matter of fact, he set it off to the lake as soon as we bury his wife."
That's just wrong.
You are
All
on,
right, this is smiling.
What was that, John?
you are on dangerous ground, James Rex.
When I saw that one, I said, there are a lot of twists on that for the boat. As soon as they put the coffin on the ground, off to the fishing lake. Oh, well. So, just looking at prophetic news, we were just discussing before we came on camera that one of the things that the church has speculated would happen is that God would turn his back on America because America's turning its back on God, and a lot of bad things would happen. Eventually, it would not be a world power. It would be the king of the north, king of the south. Obviously, we have a long way to go, but since we're talking about "Thou shalt not murder," the sixth commandment, and many of the big cities, including Baltimore, Murder in the last few months is up 161%. And they were not the safest places to begin with. So murder has gone up in many of our big cities, and I think that is at least in part because now I'm telling you what some speculators I heard on one news program said. They said because our government, or at least many aspects of the government, have become pro-criminal and anti-police. And if you become pro-criminal, the murder rate and other crimes are going to go up. And at least in the big cities, that's certainly happening.
You don't hear the stories of how the police do things to save the day. I had a lady who came in my shop, and she said she got pulled over doing like 20 miles an hour over the speed limit, and she had a gun on, and which she could legally do, and she started crying. She was so scared. And the sheriff's deputy went to the vehicle, and he says, "Do you have a gun in the car?" And she says, "Yes, I do." He goes, "Okay, I'm not going to bother you. Just leave it where it is, but I am going to go home tonight." And he says, "Do you have any drugs in the car?" And she said, "Not right now." And then she said, "I don't even know why I said that." And she's a very nice lady. I've known her a couple of years. And he went and wrote her a warning. And then he said, "You're free to leave, but I'm going to ask you not to." He says, "Open your door." And he kind of knelt down or squatted down in front of her and talked with her and asked her where she was from and how many kids she had and just calmed her down. He says, "Because I didn't want you driving so upset." He says, "So I want to take a few minutes and calm you down and let this be a positive stop." You don't hear those stories very often.
No.
No, you don't hear. Yeah, you don't. The only way you're going to hear things like that is through someone else, or maybe on some obscure site or through social media. A lot of that positive stuff only gets through on social media, and it's usually shared by people who want to hear that sort of thing. The only thing that's shared, or the only thing that we're fed through the mainstream media is the worst things and useless fluff about stars and Hollywood and that sort of stuff. But no, good things like that, we're not going to see it unless you go out and seek it.
Oh, this is an interesting story. The day after Sandy Hook, I assume the guy was crazy, from best we can tell. A crazy guy went to a movie theater in Texas. It was, I think it was San Marcos, Texas, or San Antonio, Texas, one of the two. Went to a movie theater, hopped up, pulled out a gun, and started shooting people. There happened to be a lady detective. She was in plain clothes, and she pulled out her gun and shot him to death because she could, and only a few people got wounded. Now, he got killed, only got wounded. If that police lady with her gun hadn't been in the theater, well, he could have killed 10, 15 people, theoretically. Anything's possible. And in the one shooting in Louisiana, they claimed the one reason the guy only killed the people, one of the teachers who fell to the ground had the presence of mind to pull the fire alarm. And that started a panic of people, which I guess threw the shooter off, and the police and fire department got there real quick. But it's a good policeman. That's what I'm trying to say. You rarely hear those stories. And almost all these shootings, to my knowledge, have always been in gun-free zones.
I am going to say this, though. I know a lot of cops, and a lot of cops have a us and them mentality, and they don't hang out with people that are not cops. I mean, I have two of them that I hang out with, but as a rule, they won't hang out with you unless you're law enforcement. So there is a little bit of that us and them mentality, and I think it goes by department as well.
And I give the advice, I guess every parent gives this advice. I tell my really big, strong sons, I say, look, when the police pulls you over, and I do it myself, cooperate, be respectful. The one common denominator most of shootings is resisting arrest. I'm not saying that every charge and every policeman acts polite and nice, but I said, these policemen are often just some young man with a gun. You don't want to scare the guy. Because, you know, you think he'll use great restraint. You never know. If he's scared, anything is possible. And I think if people stop resisting arrest, there'd be a lot less problems or respecting authority of the policeman.
I had a young African American guy, Sam was his name, laughed real easy. He was a nice smile and laughed easy. And he said, no cops are going to beat me up. He says, I smile and I say yes, sir, and no, sir, and I do anything they tell me. That way they don't have any reason to hit me. He said, these guys generally are running their mouth, and they get the cop, they start getting under his skin. And next thing you know, it escalates, and you never win. He pushes a button, and 30 more of them show up. You know, you don't win that one. So he said, but I laugh easy, I smile easy, I say yes, sir, and no, sir. And he says, I don't do anything to give him any thought that I would do anything. And he goes, I don't even think about it. It's a non-subject to me. And I think the people that really worry about it are the ones that are not going to be cooperative, they're not going to be nice, aren't going to say yes, sir, and no, sir, and that kind of stuff. You know, so that they bring it on themselves a lot of times.
And thinking about America losing blessings, the one thing that I noted today was the media plays the role of the false prophet. And you might look at the article in the current 21st Century Watch which discusses that. One of the things I noted in the media this week was they put an emphasis on the lion, and that's a poaching crime, you know, poaching, but they downplayed people selling baby parts. And most Americans say they don't want to defund Planned Parenthood. And I'm asking myself, I'm just asking, have we become so much into paganism, animal worship, nature worship, that animals, and I'm not justifying poaching, but that animals are more important than babies and human beings?
The lion story got more play in one day by the mainstream media than the Planned Parenthood videos did in the last 3 weeks. That's a fact. They ran the airtime for that. It got more play than these Planned Parenthood videos.
I was talking to Ken this morning in Atlanta, and he said, lock that lion in a big cage, throw a person in there, and don't feed that lion, and see how that goes.
Yeah.
It's like the Wizard of Oz story when he comes in and says, king, king, or sire, sire. The animal rights activists are at the gate and they're protesting, and he says, release the hounds.
You know what? I've always found it curious that the amount of outrage over killing an animal is directly connected to how cute it's perceived as being. Had he done that to an alligator or a snake or, you know, something that wasn't considered too cute, nobody would have said a word. Because they see this big fluffy lion and they think it's cute, all of a sudden he's ostracized, the most hated man on the internet, they said, all kinds of things.
In Florida, we have what's called the castle doctrine. And that is, if anyone breaks into your home, you don't have to give them warning or anything. You can just shoot them without, you know, you broke in, you got shot, there you go. A few years ago, a lady walked in her living room. There was like a 7-foot alligator in there. She had a toddler. She picked her kid up, and she went in the other room and got her husband's gun, went out and shot that alligator, and they arrested her because it's an endangered species. So for cruelty to a protected species. Alligators are protected. Human beings are not.
I mean, it's almost laughable.
In her own home.
Worship.
Yeah. If it wasn't so sad, yeah, you're right, it is.
And someday, when the curses of God come on this country more and more, the animals will be one of the factors that will attack us. You know, when you have too many wild animals too close to urban populations and some rural populations, bad things start to happen. Think about, you let all these gators get too many and too close to people, and bears, and you know, I can think of 1,000 different scenarios, but you get a general idea.
They turn wolves loose all over the country, and I'm reading things where the wolves are breeding with coyotes, so now you've got this hybrid kind of animal. A fellow was in Tennessee and said I guess he was deer hunting, and he saw a deer. The deer was running, and he saw something chasing it, and he told me, he goes, it was a wolf.
And by one of the most deadly things in nature is a wolf pack. You get 8 or 9 wolves that are healthy and strong, They can bring, I mean, theoretically, they can bring down a bear, a big bear, and they can do a lot of damage to people. You know, think about. Anyway, there are a lot of dangers, and I think one of the things that's going to come on this country when God removes His protection. And how close do you think we are to God starting to take His blessings away from America and His protection?
I think
Well,
we're there now. I think
we are there.
You're
now.
talking in the past tense now. He began withdrawing these blessings years ago.
Yep.
Years and years ago.
You remember the fuss they made about Sarah Palin shooting all those wolves? The wolves were hunting down stuffed weed. I don't remember what it was, goats or something, caribou maybe, and she was leaning out of the helicopter and picking them off. I personally, I thought she was really cool hanging out of a helicopter picking them off, but the rest of society made a real fuss about it.
Well,
Actually, hunting, now I'm not saying poaching where you overdo it and break the rules, but let's say lawful, reasonable hunting is actually good for the environment. One of the first big environmentalists, Teddy Roosevelt, was a big-time hunter. Because hunting, and that's why nature has predators, it keeps the herd healthy. It thins it out, gets rid of the sick, weak. You know what I'm saying? So appropriate hunting is, and people have done that for years, but we're becoming so much into animal worship, we're doing things that aren't going to be good for us. And deers are going to be causing more deaths too, because they're not chasing the forest.
Yeah, they're already a problem here. It's called conservation, and you know if you control herds, thin these wild animals when they get out of control, you prevent disease in the population and all kinds of things that need to be done. But the wacky environmentalists, environmental whack, they want you to. I mean, they prefer that humans die and animals continue. That is, they almost have a death-centric belief. They prefer that we die and they live.
You read some of their
they think we deserve it.
You read some of their literature, and they say the problem on the planet Earth is people. We need to get rid of, and they literally say, get rid of people. Don't have babies. Get rid of people. And you know, you think, wow, that's pretty crazy. And they say we don't want it. They don't want you eating meat. They want you to eat bugs. And I'm not making that up because people, you're kidding me. No, radical environmentalists say we can save the planet. We learn to eat bugs, grubworms, and beetles, and don't have any ranchers and chicken farmers. And I'm thinking. The crazies are starting to run the country. They're the ones running the EPA, and they're going to be running more stuff if they have their way.
What a lot of people don't think about is the people running all these things were the long-haired hippie freaks back in the 60s. You know, drop in, drug out, whatever it was he said. Now those are the people running everything. So you can see the mess that we've got.
Those people they go as far outside the norm as something totally crazy. I mean, no matter how crazy it is, and they'll try and use linguistics and language to try and twist it to make it believable and usable. All of a sudden, their craziness is now brilliance. And they'll go as far out left field as they can possibly go with some insane idea, but they're able to twist it and bring it back to, oh, they're brilliant. No, they're stupid, and you're dumb enough for listening to them.
I think it was Alan West that said, Obama said, we've struck a deal that no other president's ever been able to do with Iran. And I think it was Alan West, he says, yeah, nobody else has done it because it's stupid. You know?
I don't know if that was him. I heard that same quote. I don't know who said it, but yeah, it was stupid.
Either him or Trump.
And, you know, as far as animal worship goes, much of paganism is based on worshiping of animals. You know, like when the Israelites put up the calf or the bull, the Egyptians, I think it was Isis was his name, the Egyptians literally worshiped bulls and cows. Well, they worshiped other things too, but In other words, and trees, and that's what we're headed toward, worshiping of nature and discounting the Bible. Speaking of the Bible, the sixth commandment, thou shalt not kill, really should be translated, thou shalt not murder. Because obviously, if you read the Bible, animals were killed for food and safety, because sometimes you have to, kill a few wolves to get them away from little kids and people, for food and safety, and of course for sacrifice to God. And the death penalty does exist in the Bible. And I'm just going to mention it, but you can read up on Numbers 36, 6-17. When Israel was a nation, God set up a series of safety cities. And if you killed someone by accident, and you worried about their relatives wanting revenge, you'd run to one of the safety cities. They would put you on trial. They'd get all the evidence. And if they concluded it was an accident, you could stay there safe, until the pressure was off and the new high priest came. But if it was determined that you murdered someone, murder, requires motive and planning, and I hate him and that's why I did it, or I want to steal his money, or something like that, greed, and you murdered him with a reason, then you were executed. And I honestly believe, I see these TV shows, saw one the other day, and it's in California, and they're threatening this thug with the death penalty. And I've seen this show once or twice. They actually did this, they said. And the guy said, they haven't executed anybody in California in 20 years. You're going to threaten me with that? You're kidding. But in Texas, they actually do execute them fairly promptly. They said, well, what if we sent you to Texas? And that got a whole new response out of me. But the point is, I honestly believe if we were to execute people who were guilty of murder, I mean, not questionable stuff, but really, absolute hard and first-degree murder, fairly promptly, it would be a deterrent.
There was some comedian that said the whole world's yelling about whether or not, he's a Texan, whether or not the death penalty is constitutional and right and all this. He says, while y'all are arguing that, Texas is putting in a beltway system to get them there, or something like that. Conveyor belt system to get them there. Go ahead, John.
That's. He said my state's building a highway, freeway to get them there.
Something like that. Here's the deal. We got a sheriff in the area. Grady Judd is his name. I post some stuff that he does every now and then. And he's over in Polk County. When I'm in Polk County, I'm particularly careful to obey the laws. They asked him, they said, why did your deputy shoot that man 69 times? And he said, oh, they ran out of ammo. Yeah. I went to a meeting that he did where he read scriptures out of the Bible, and he said, if you get a sight picture on one of my deputies, you're never going to see a lawyer. So I behaved myself in Polk County, let me tell you.
And think about it, if you're an average criminal in many of these, especially far left states, where there's no death penalty, or if it is, it takes forever, and you'll die of old age before you ever get there. You say, and you pull a gun on some convenience store, and you're robbing the guy for hopefully $1,000 or $500 or something. And for some reason, you think he's moving around in a way that has you worried. You're thinking, well, if I murder him for the money, and I get caught, I'll probably get 20, 25 years. If I rob him and get away, I may still get 10 or 15 years with parole and making deals. The difference is kind of in the fluff. Does that make sense? There's no, in other words, the law should put a price. When you break a law, the penalty you pay shows how much they value that law. Some things you break it, you just get a 90-day sentence, or you get a $1,000 fine or a $50 fine. Others, if you break it, you get a death penalty. That shows you that God values life. You take somebody's life, you have to you forfeit your life.
In 1993, about I think it was 5:18 a.m., I went around a corner, and this guy was standing in his yard, and there was a girl on the lawn laying down. He said, I got to get rid of her. He'd come over and talk to me. And whenever he picked her up and threw her in the back of the car, and off he went. He had bragged for a year that he was going to rape and kill this girl. He did. He's still living in that same house. He went to prison. He pled guilty to second degree, and they dropped every other charge. And he did 17 years, and he's back on the street.
And he probably only did 8 or 9 or 10 hard time years, right?
No, he did. They gave him life in Florida, but 493. If you got life, they got what they called game time. So life was 40 years, and he was such a good inmate. He was so good at being in prison. I think if you're good at something, you should stick with it. He was so good at being in prison that they let him out in 17 years, and he went right back to living in the house with his mom, the same house he raped and killed the girl in.
So,
That's what I mean.
Go back to Dr. Rick's earlier statement. Her life was valued at 17 years of his life. So her entire life was valued as at only 17 years of his life, which puts very little value on her life. Everything in this society that you see from, it's a theme, but I don't know how to get away from it. The progressive, the socialist community is death-centered. Abortion and the women's movement. You cannot take away abortion from the women's right. What's the name of the women's right?
Now.
Feminism. Now,
feminist. You cannot take abortion away from the feminist movement. They have to have it. They have to use it to separate a woman from her child, to separate a woman from being a woman, in order to get them into their camp. It's crazy how the whole thing, but everything in this society today seems to be death-centered. Exactly what Satan wants to do. I mean, we talk about paganism. You talk about the Mayans, the Aztecs, and how big of butchers they were. I don't think that the Mayans, the Aztecs, the pagans, Molech, all the sacrifices added up throughout history. I bet they don't add up to the amount of babies we've aborted in this country in the last 45, whatever it is, years.
I don't think it's possible. It's interesting how this is all going, because there's a passage of a few scriptures in Romans, if I can read them. That be okay?
Right ahead.
Romans 1:21. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal man and birds and animals and reptiles. Therefore God gave them over to sinful desires, and their hearts to sexual impurity, for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and they worshipped and served the created rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen. Because of this, God gave them over to debased minds, for even their women exchanged the natural relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, the men also abandoned the natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed indecent acts with men and received in themselves the due penalty for their perversion. This isn't new. And then it goes on. It talks about grave depravity, and I can't see it without those. Greed, depravity, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. So that he throws this sexual perversion in with the worship of animals, and then ties it to murder as well. This isn't a new thing. This was Paul 2,000 years ago. And the cycle continues.
Yep.
And I was thinking, when you think about this commandment, Christ in the Sermon on the Mount, he elaborated and gave the spiritual meaning of many of the laws in the Bible. And one of the ones he elaborated on is the 6th commandment, murder. I'm going to read Matthew 5:21. Now, this is a more poignant translation, but I think the meaning is there in any translation. Matthew 5:21. You've heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not murder. Anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Anyone who says to his brother, Raka, is answerable to the Sanhedrin. Anyone who says, you fool, danger of hellfire. And we don't mean burning forever and ever and never burning up. I think he meant the lake of fire that turned you into ashes. Therefore, if any are offering your gift at the altar, remember that your brother has something against you. Leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to your brother and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary. Now, I'm going to go to verse 43, but I believe it's the same topic. Same topic, verse 43. You've heard that it was said, love your neighbor, hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies. You realize most of the scripts for most Hollywood movies are vengeance. I got to get, they did this to so-and-so, they humiliated me, I got to get back at them. We got to win back, take over, You think about it as getting the bad guys. Now the government has a role to protect us, so they should put murderers in jail. So I'm not saying the government shouldn't put murderers in jail. But Christ is not talking about government function here. He's talking about personal conduct and a personal thing. And this is not the army either. This is just the personal thing. Love your enemy. Pray for those who persecute you. By the way, do you know there's a scripture in Leviticus where it says, if your neighbor that you don't like loses some of his cattle and other property, you're supposed to take care of it for him, the neighbor that you don't like. And it also says you should, Leviticus 19:17 through 19, says something a little bit similar to what Christ is saying. We should love people and not get angry at them. Let me finish reading Matthew 5, because I think it's really important that we Christians see the spiritual beauty and I'll call it greatness of what Christ said. The opposite of what's going on in the world today. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. And I don't think he means pray that they get their due dessert before the night's over. Pray for those that persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good. He sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors? You could put in, instead of tax collectors, you could put in gangsters. A lot of gangsters love their gang buddies. And other bad actors out there. Not even tax collectors doing that. And if you greet only your brothers, what are you doing more than others? Do not be like the pagans. Be perfect as your Father is perfect in heaven. And maybe perfect could be mature obedience, think of what a world would be like if people were taught to be nice to those they don't like.
There's a scripture that says when you pray for your enemies, it's like pouring burning coals upon their head, because you're praying for them. Everything ends up on them at that point.
And they will straighten themselves out and do better and not get in trouble. And but think of what that does for our heart, because God is more. One thing I realized as I thought about these scriptures, God is more concerned about us than our enemies.
Absolutely.
One thing they know, hatred is hard on your heart.
I was talking with Larry Barnhouse this morning, and I said I read something, I don't know where, and it says have no fear in the Bible. It was just those words. And he goes, I'm going to research that and call you back. And he called me back, and he says he found the words fear not 170 times in the Bible. God loves us, but we've got to act right. Or, if we turn our back, we'll turn it on ourselves. I have in the past prayed for people that have done me wrong, and one of the things I did was don't just forgive them, call them into the church, because when they do that, then they'll look in the mirror, hopefully, and then they'll change. Don't just forgive them and let it go. Bless them, call them into the church so that we never have this issue again.
Speaking of hearts, I wrote this down. I want to mention it. Pray for Judy Roberts. You all may know more about her condition than I do, but I talked to her on the phone, well, about 10 or 9, 10, 11 days ago. She had some kind of heart attack. She gave a technical name, and I didn't write it down. Don't want to say the wrong thing. But some kind of heart stress thing, and she's real tired. But then when the doctors checked her arteries, they were not clogged, and when they checked her heart valves, if I understand it correctly, there was no malfunction. In other words, they don't really know what happened. And she's not that old. I guess I don't know her age, but I know she's younger than I am by quite a bit. She probably maybe well, I better not say that on the air, but she's a young woman. Her kids are only like 25 years old.
Right. I talked with Stan the other day, and he said that she's just very, very tired, very run down. I told him, though, hopefully this went well. I don't know when he sat right with him. I said, but you know, Stan, when something happens with you and your wife or your kids or whatever, you got more people praying for you than you realize. And so hopefully, because everybody knows him, you know, few people know me and some know everybody else, but everybody knows him. So I'm sure that God is getting inundated with people saying, take care of Stan and Judy.
And besides Judy Roberts being sick, Carolyn Birch, we mentioned her before, she has a serious cancer, and the doctor's giving her a real nice special treatment at Jewish Barnes in St. Louis. And she's in the heart of the treatment where they're going to do all kinds of special stuff and then take it out. So pray that all goes right and the doctors don't mess it up. And Lois Chapman, as you probably know, had that fistula, a big hole in her intestines. They closed it up, but she hasn't been able to eat, hold down food, is really thin. At least a couple of days ago, I haven't checked lately, she was in intensive care in the hospital in Tyler. Keep praying for her. They said she'll be in the hospital for several weeks minimum.
We have while we're on the subject, I guess, we have a lady in the Panhandle, Wanda, and they went to rent the room that they use, and she asked why they wanted it. They talked with her. She's been attending church with us, and she's the piano player for them up in the Panhandle. And she just had surgery and on her knee, and I believe that that all went well, but they used the wrong tape or whatever, and she's allergic to that. But she's not a spring chicken anymore, so just letting everybody know that there's people out there that need your prayers that maybe you don't know about. You know, I looked up the word and thou shalt not kill, because that's not, as you mentioned, the correct term. The word is kind of specific to humans, and I'm gonna botch this, but it's racha, and it is specific to murder. You cannot murder a goat or a lion. You can kill them. It's two different things. Murder pertains to your brother, your fellow man, and that was the intent of that. Of thou shalt not murder. Why they interpreted thou shalt not kill? While they were men that would hunt and slaughter animals for food and whatever. I don't understand why it was interpreted that way.
Yep.
There's a few things that we know that are interpreted incorrectly, and I think it's just a way to trip people up that don't really want to know the truth anyway.
And I was thinking about the root cause of murder and violence in the world in general is abandoning God's values, especially His family values. Because it seems to me that as the world becomes more secularized and they ban the Bible from public square, violence and various atrocities by crazy people seems to be going up, 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 and up.
Right. I was talking to Clyde Crawford today as well, and we talked about this. And he said something to the effect of, and if I botch this, I probably can, but at one time, according to him, Garner Ted said that pre-World War II, they had more demonism in India than anywhere in the world. World War II came, it moved to Germany, and after Germany fell, it moved to the Soviet Union, and after the Soviet Union fell, they had to come here. So we're seeing the craziness of violent crime and all of that stuff raised. I went to a meeting with our local sheriff, and he gave us a speech, and he said that people ask him why the crime is so much more violent and the offenders are so much younger. And he says, well, we don't have the Golden Rule Sunday School and the Ten Commandments taught to our kids anymore. He said when he was a kid, his mother says, I may not catch you, teacher may not catch you, the principal may not catch you, he's going to catch you. He says, so I had a fear of God catching me and being punished. So I was going to be a good young man. He said the average criminal now has committed 10 felonies before he's ever discovered. And he says they're doing it much younger, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, raping and killing. That he says our country has turned its back on God. And I was talking to Stanley the other day, and he said maybe that is the great falling away, that our country has fallen away from where our boundaries, our founders wrote Christian principled documentation for our Constitution and other documents, and we've turned from that. And maybe that is a part of the great falling away as well.
Yeah, we have allowed these people to erase, over the last 50, 60, 70 years, erase God from our society. It's like if you had the name God on a chalkboard and you slowly bring the eraser and forth over it, they're slowly fading him into the background, and they're bringing all this old satanic kind of pagan stuff out into the foreground. And they're, the mainstream in this country is swapping the two out right now. And we're from society, we're really seeing God pushed out of all things public and all things America, and replaced with gay this, with abortion, murder, everything that is anti-God, anti-Christ is being celebrated in our society, and everything that is decent is being shoved into a box.
I went to on Facebook to a friend of mine's page, and I thought I've known this guy 30 some odd years, and I want to see if the other guy, he's a karate guy, and I want to see if the guys that I knew from back then were still around. And I clicked on his friends list, and there's his son, an identical twin to his dad. He's engaged to marry Thomas, and his daughter lives with her girlfriend, and everything is backwards. And they're like doing family pictures. Everything is backwards, and he's on there with guys sitting on his lap and cross dressers and kissing them, and gave the address to a church and said, mail your feces to this church.
What?
Yeah, he says animal feces is recyclable. Mail it to this church, and gave an address of a church.
Oh, I won't say anything.
Yeah, I mean, this is, and by the way, his mom was a baptized member worldwide.
Wow. Then there's the Ten Commandments we know were elevated in the New Testament. They were elevated to more of a spiritual sense. Anybody want to talk about? Because I don't remember which verse that it is where it talks about that if you hate your brother, you have murdered him in your heart, pretty much. How the new commandment elevates, or the New Testament elevates these commandments, and specifically this one, that hatred and intense, disdain for someone is pretty much that you've committed the crime in your heart.
I believe that's in Matthew 5:20 to 24, and I'm going to paraphrase it because we read part of it already, but it says in effect that if you condemn your brother, because Raka's way of condemning him and hating him, if you're angry and hate him, it's almost as bad as if you murdered him. And then it says, and if you look on a woman to lust after her in her heart, I realize that's coming in the near future. It's just as bad as if you did commit adultery. Now, we're not saying it's as bad as committing adultery, but it's the first step. What's the first step in murder? Hatred. What's the first step in running off with your neighbor's wife? Is desiring her in the wrong way. In other words, and I see what God's saying. Sin starts in your heart and your mind, and that's where we have to fight it.
I teach some law enforcement courses, and one of them that I do, one of the parts that when I teach people is there's 3 steps taken in any crime. First off, you have to think about committing the crime. Second is you test it. You know, can I rob that bank? Well, let's go look at the bank. So I thought about it, then I went and looked at it. What's left? I think I can do this. You actually attempt to rob the bank. So there's 3 steps taken, it seems like, in any sin. And the first one is it starts out in your head. And that's what Christ was addressing, or Matthew was addressing at that time. So you don't have it in your head to begin with. You know, you are what you think.
And that's what.
Well, that's not good.
And I think parents, you know, we're talking about family values being abandoned. I think when parents tell their kids that they should behave themselves, they're actually trying to teach the child good behavior. I have a joke about it, but I decide not to tell the joke because the child and the joke is in such a disrespectful attitude that, well, maybe it's not worth telling, but maybe I'll tell it at a later time. But the fact that the mother, I'll just tell you the joke in a short version. It won't be as funny, but it makes a point. The mother is listening to her son playing with the electric train, and he's saying to people in there, you know, get your behinds off this train, hurry up, we got to board some more people. Telling the people, hurry up and get your behinds on this train, we got to get it moving. Maybe it's a little more colorful. And the mother says, what? That's terrible language. You can't be playing with your electric train that way. I want you to go upstairs in your room for 2 hours as punishment. He comes back. She said, have you learned your lesson? He says, yes. So he goes, you can go back and play with your electric train. And she's listening. And he says all the nice things like, would you please board the train, no smoking, everybody move calmly, all very nice things. To the people leaving the train, we thank you for traveling with us, all very nice stuff. And the mother's smiling. And then he says, but you can blame the BITCH in the next room for your 2-hour delay.
Wow.
And I didn't tell that joke because it's I didn't like the language of it, especially that part. But the point I'm making is parents used to teach kids to be respectful in the way they talked and acted.
You know,
and I think a lot of parents are doing that.
I have some very nice families that I work with, and they've got kids in my classes, and I preach. It's what I do, and I get in there and I ask the kids. I go, "Did your mom give you time out when you misbehaved?" And generally they say yes. And I go, "My mom gave me knock you out." And the other ones I say, "Did your mom give you time out?" And if they say yes, I go, "My mom gave me time travel. She'd slap me in the next week." And so that's what's wrong with society today. We don't have knock you out. We don't slap you in the next week. We have time out.
Well, we all know that human nature, as we know it, is a combination of vanity, jealousy, lust, and greed. And we're talking here about doing no murder. And we can go back to the very first murder, the first 2 boys, Cain and Abel. Why did Cain slay Abel? What was his motivation? What triggered his emotional response to go that far? To me, it was jealousy. That green-eyed monster that is talked about so much. Plain jealousy, and then became hate to the point of murder. Notice how quickly in that story and in the examples in the Bible and the examples today we're talking about, how quickly that emotional range geometrically explodes. There's not much lack of time in there. You're jealous, you go in a rage, and away you go. Look at the uncontrollable rage in these riots that we've had. There's absolutely no sense to it whatsoever. It's just simple, jealous rage over supposedly things that are wrong and that weren't wrong to begin with. But that's the very first murder there. And on it goes. And until human nature is subdued in the kingdom of God, it's going to continue and get worse and worse. We as Christians, however, have to follow Proverbs, which says, he that rules his spirit is better than he that takes a city. We have to learn through God's Holy Spirit to use the fruits of God's Holy Spirit and put down that initial rush of jealousy, which leads to other things. Because let's face it, we're all human, and we all have the same emotional outbreaks from time to time. So that's just what I want to interject there for a moment.
I'd like to say two things, and I'll make it fast as I can. There was a spirit of rebellion to begin with. God said, bring me an animal, and he brought fruits and vegetables. And God gave him a chance. He says, listen, go sell your fruits and vegetables and bring me the best animal you can find. He gave him a second chance. And he said, oh, yeah, you're going to take my brothers, but not mine. Okay, you want a blood offering? I'll give you a blood offering. And he went and killed his own brother. But here's the deal. When Eve gave birth to Cain, she said, I have received a man from the Lord. She didn't say anything when Abel came, at least not recorded. So they were probably raised differently. Cain apparently was a mama's boy. Didn't get correction, wasn't taught to be humble, wasn't taught to be obedient. It's just a little statement in there, but it kind of leads me to think that way.
Because he was first?
He was first.
He got spoiled. It's a possibility he is spoiled because he's first. By the way, I want to read Isaiah 5:20. The media is doing a lot of this, and a lot of churches are just going along with it too. Woe to those who call good evil, evil good, and good evil, who put darkness for light, light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet, and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and clever in their own sight. And you know that if you're a main celebrity and stuff, and you start talking about family values and doing the right thing, they start making fun of you. You become a target for criticism. And if you're just a bum, like someone like David Letterman, who admits he's kind of a low character, they love him.
Yeah, if you saw the interview with Shepard Smith and Rick Santorum, because Rick Santorum said he did not believe in homosexual marriage, and Shepard Smith, boy, he was laughing and trying to call him a fool and stupid. When are you going to get with what's going on in the times? And we live in it's perilous times to try to do good and be a Christian today.
Yep. Just real quick, going back to what John said, the key he hit it on the head. The key is discipline. I mean, to progress as a Christian is discipline and wisdom. You know, if you can master your human side, you're getting there, and that also is what would diffuse that trigger when it goes off. To just take a minute and breathe, or not even get to that point if you can. But discipline is the key to try and stay with this till the end.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
No, it says, he who endures until the end, the same shall be saved. You don't endure eating ice cream. You know, you endure things being difficult.
And it's not always easy to control your jealousy. You got to fight it. By the way, the last thing I think we might want to mention is big socialist progressive governments believe the ends justify the means, and therefore they have murdered, and I mean murdered, many, not in combat, but I mean in government murders. I've got this book called The Big Black Book of Communism, and it's well documented. I mean, they well documented. That's what's so scary. You know that Stalin, of course, took it to a whole new level of evil when he got charged. But Lenin used food as a weapon to force people in line with his socialist paradise. And then they came up with food police, and they starved people. There's so many atrocities in Russia during most of the communist era that it's unbelievable, just unbelievable. And basically, the ends justify the means. To create their socialist collective workers' paradise, they had to break a few eggs. And I want to read this quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He's a Russian who won the prize for peace. But he spent at least the first 50 or so years in his life in the Soviet Union, and his family suffered. Here's what he said. Over half a century ago, while I was still a child, I recall hearing a number of older people offer the following explanation for the great disasters that had befallen the Russian people. Men have forgotten God, and that's why all this has happened. As you know, the communists were totally godless. Since then, I've spent well nigh 50 years working on the history of our Russian Revolution. In the process, I've read hundreds of books, collected hundreds of personal testimonies, and I've already contributed 8 volumes of my own toward the effort of clearing away rubble left by the horrible upheaval. But if I'm ever asked today to formulate concisely as possible the main cause for the ruinous revolution that swallowed up, he thinks, up to 60 million Russians, I could not put it more accurately than to repeat, men have forgotten God, and that's why all of this have happened. And as you know, the Nazis are socialists too, because Nazi means National Socialist Party, and Hitler used the SS and the Gestapo. I've heard recently that they may have killed 9 million of their own people. I mean, German people, not in combat, just in getting government power and abusing it. And just here's some random numbers. When I say murder done by big socialist governments to kick God out, and they believe in things like euthanasia, aborting those that they don't like, and all kinds of horrible things. China, 65 million deaths. North Korea, 2 million deaths. Cambodia, this is after America left Cambodia and Vietnam, 2 million deaths. Africa, 1.7 million. Afghanistan, 1.5 million. I didn't realize the Russian communists and the Afghan communists killed 1.5 million Afghans before they were run out of Afghanistan. Vietnam, 1 million deaths. That's after America left and turned that part of the world over to them. Eastern Europe, 1 million deaths. And then he has smaller numbers for a bunch of other countries. And I think, wow. You talk about, that's where man's philosophies have led, to big government murder. Like Stalin, they would put people in boxcars, supposedly on their way to other parts of Russia, in the ice-cold winter, just leave them there for a few days knowing that they'd freeze to death. And they did. The stuff they did is just, you have to read the book. It's unbelievable.
You remember Voltaire's expression, those who can convince you of absurdity can compel you to commit atrocity. Never forget that.
The French Revolution killed a whole lot of people too, murdered a lot of people too. Never read about that. That's scary as well. And these are all the human, socialist, non-God ideas. And what's scary is America is turning more and more toward the secular, non-Bible, big government can solve your problems concepts. And I mean, we're not as bad as the Soviet Union or anything like that, but it's not going to be good for this country.
And Bernie Sanders, a card-carrying commie pinko, is bringing in more crowds than Hillary is. Much larger crowds than Hillary is. So the young people, and even the not-so-young people, like what he says about workers and the same kind of trash that Lenin and Stalin spewed, same kind of junk that he's spewing, and it's getting people that should know better. Doesn't matter. They're falling for it just same as they did back then. We'll do it right this time. The problem with socialism or liberalism is they don't think they've done enough of it. So every time liberalism fails, they just think they should do more liberalism. Well, look at Detroit. See what it got you there.
I'll tell you one thing. People, and it sounds elitist, but most people have so little economic and business knowledge. They think, well, why don't we just raise minimum wage? The problem with that is it means less and less jobs, less and less successful business. Otherwise, why not pay everybody $100 minimum wage? Well, obviously that won't work. In other words, there are limits to what you can do, and there's a price to be paid for everything you do. People think the government can give you something free. There is no free lunch. Not only can the government not give it to you free, the bureaucracy is so inefficient in more ways than one, it'll actually cost you more if the government gives it to you than if a charity does, or you know what I'm saying, you give it to yourself.
I read something, I think it was today, it said a license is a freedom the government has taken from you, but then will sell it back to you.
Right. Anything that you see, that's why the Constitution was all rights given to us by God. That way, the government couldn't take them away. What the government gives you, the government can take away, and that's why they wrote the Constitution the way they did. And that's why the left has been trying to subvert the Constitution ever since.
Do you know why there's a marriage license? Democratic?
Yeah, I do, because they didn't. Well, I heard a couple of things, but one of them I heard was they tried to prevent interracial marriage by using that.
That's what I heard. And why not make money on it?
And probably polygamy too, but oh well, that's interesting. You know, they say a government big enough to give you almost everything you want is big enough to also take it away from you too. And these countries, the people were always unarmed. They didn't want the people having any guns, and they did terrible things to them. And it's just a gruesome story. And I just want to mention, so big governments also murder people, and it's one of those stories that few people, they know about the Nazis, but they don't realize Stalin killed more than twice as many people than Hitler did.
Right. And last piece, before they implement their plan fully, is to take away the weapons.
Yes.
They have to do that to fully implement this culture of death upon this country.
Oh, I would like to change our topic for next week, if it's okay with you all. And I mentioned this before we went on the air. We're listening to a program, and this guy had this man all confused. He said that everything in the Old Testament has been done away unless it was specifically reintroduced in the New Testament. And I think that's a topic that we ought to cover. I know we've talked about parts of it, but our people need to know how to defend themselves against that argument about everything in the Old Testament has been done away unless it was reintroduced in the New Testament. And of course, the thing they're after most is the Sabbath, but they may come after other things too, depending.
Right. I think it's a good idea to give the people, to give all of us tools we can use to defend these topics against people that, just, come up with this stuff. And it's a good idea to give us articles, references to go in the Bible. It's a good way to do it.
And so if you're listening to us, come back next weekend and see what we have to say about, is everything in the Old Testament done away? Because and can they use that to get around the Sabbath or clean and unclean meats, whatever else, different ones want to get around different things.
And explaining the Old Testament versus the Old Covenant, and a lot of people don't know the difference in that. Newer people, don't know what a covenant and a testament are, and so making that understandable would be a good thing to throw in there as well, I think.
Well, if we're done, I'm going to sign off. We've got next week lined up now. So if nobody has anything else to add, we're going to say good night to everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. And remember, everybody, seek the kingdom first, and have a great Sabbath.
You too.
We're happy you could make it. So glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.